that's how they saw things, right? That's how they saw things. That Paul's message is the only type of message that can exist now in this world of a destroyed Jerusalem.
So the letters that Paul writes, he writes to Corinth,
Yeah.
right? Which is, I believe, in Greece.
Yeah.
He writes to Philippians, he writes to the church in Rome.
Yeah.
So you would have to explain how all those places have churches in them that all agree with the same basic ideas.
But didn't he say, I've won a lot of these churches for you? Like, in one of his writings, he talks about how he's won these churches from a different ideology.
See, a much more simpler explanation is simply that he went there, because that's what Acts says. He went to these places.
Sure.
He established churches, and he's writing to them about things that they've already discussed. I mean, that's a very simple, easy explanation. Like, if there was an equivalent in the Islamic perspective, I'd just accept it, because it's simple.
Yeah.
It makes sense. What I question are things that are difficult, not the things that are simple.
No, I understand. And like, I'm just talking, in terms of like the Gospels, I find them very anti-Semitic in the way that they put a lot of blame on the Pharisees. They put the blame on the Pharisees as having killed God, for example, according to your understanding, right? And stuff like that. So
there is a
whereas
verse
like
in...
there's Jesus, according to the Gospels themselves, he gets a lot of help from the Pharisees, and he seems to be preaching a message to the Pharisees. He seems to be like...
his ministry does include preaching to Pharisees. Yeah, definitely.
And the way the Gospels portray Pontius Pilate as some kind of like saint, right? I believe he is recognized as a saint in one of the Ethiopian churches.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
I did
which
not
is
know that. That's
so
interesting. But no, Pontius Pilate.
Whereas he was a really ruthless person who was actually disciplined by the Romans.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy, Pontius Pilate. But yeah, like he in the Gospels he's kind of described as a coward.
I don't think so.
Really? Like, I mean, he literally he bends to the call of the Jewish people, saying, like, give us Barnabas, right?
Yeah.
Like we and crucify Christ.
Yeah.
He does. He just goes, I'll wipe my hands of it. You've said it.
Yeah, but he wouldn't have been a figure like that because there would have been many messiahs going on at that time, and he was very brutal, and he was like, as you said, right? He was disciplined by the Romans for being extremely brutal in Judea. So why would he be someone who's like so willing to give this messiah a stage and willing to give him a trial and wiping his hands off any blame? That doesn't fit with the figure of the historical Pontius Pilate at all.
Well, in what sense?
The fact that he's a really brutal person who would be killing Jews in their thousands, why would he give one Jew?
You can be brutal, but also just not care.
Yeah, but doesn't that kind of seem like, yeah.
I mean, to be honest with you, I would just say, he doesn't care. Like, it's not his affairs.
Okay.
Like, he was brutal towards Jews, absolutely. But in the same sense, the Jews have come to him saying, we have a problem with this one Jewish person, who, and then they would have basically told him that he was claiming to be the king of the Jews, because that was their way of getting him interested in this, because that is something he would care about, because that's a claim on authority, right?
Well, not necessarily, because there was like the Egyptian, the Samaritan, Simon Kokhba later. There were so many Jewish messiahs that were claiming to be Jewish messiahs.
No. The problem isn't the Messiah. So, it's the king of the Jews.
Yeah.
Because king means Lord. It means Caesar. In other words, what the Jews basically describe Jesus as to Pontius Pilate is, this man claims to be our Lord, and we should follow him in contrast to Caesar. Because I don't know. There's a part in the Gospels where the Pharisees go up to Jesus and they say, should we pay our taxes?
Yeah.
And the idea is that it's a trick because, basically, are you saying that the Jews should follow Caesar as their Lord or Yahweh as their Lord? And either way, he's going to get in trouble. So,
and that point there, so that's straight after he goes and he flips the tables in the temple, right?
I can't remember exactly when it
is. I think it's a bit after then that he's done a very anti-establishment act by going into the temple with a following, flipping tables, releasing animals. That's a direct opposition to the high priest of the temple, right? He's basically saying, I'm the authority, not you. The high priest is put in that position by the Roman authorities. So him doing that action is an anti-Roman action as well. So the Jews, a few days later, they go up to him and they'd put that challenge to him, right? His response, give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what's God's. The way that's traditionally understood, it seems to ignore the actual Greek, so I can't remember the actual Greek from the top of my head. I can catch up with you on it later, but he's saying give to Caesar what's Caesar's, so he's kind of distancing himself from that Roman image on that coin, right? Because at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a dispute about whether the Jews in that region could use Roman coinage because it has an image of the emperor who's claiming to be God.
I'm not sure.
So there's, I think that's why there was a dispute as well, that there's these coins that we're using that have like a fake God on it. Are we allowed to use that, or is it idolatry? And a lot of the Jews in that region who were like Orthodox, they would be like, no, we're not allowed to use these coins. So that's also a reason why they asked him that question, like, are we allowed?
I don't know what they would use alternatively, because again,
they were minting some coins in the temple as an alternative, I believe.
Okay.
So
I guess.
because you couldn't bring Roman coinage into the temple.
Yeah, but minting coins in a temple, I don't know.
I'm not. I can. Yeah.
Mints tend to be big operations,
Sure,
right?
sure.
But I don't know.
But I might be wrong there. But yeah. So with so when he says give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give back to God what's God's, he says give back to God what's God's. So that's in the Greek. What he's saying, give back to God what's God's, Reza Aslan interprets that as being give back Jerusalem and Palestine back to God, what's God's. And then they see that as an act of rebellion. So they're basically checking if Jesus is a rebel against the Roman Empire and against the authorities, right? So after his temple destruction, not destruction, but like vandalism. So they ask him this question. He confirms that he is a zealot against the temple authorities and against the Roman Empire. A few days later, they come to his forces and then they arrest Jesus. There's a little scuffle, and then they crucify him as a bandit, right? As a lestai, which in the Greek means bandit. They would only crucify someone as a lestai if they are a rebel to the Roman occupation.
Yeah, which is how the Jews described him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's very anti-Roman. So he's very anti-Roman, eh, as a figure.
What do you mean by that? He was very anti-Roman.
So he's very anti-establishment. He's very anti the Jewish.
Well, no, I don't think you can say
he's very
anti-establishment.
He's anti the Sadducees, right? And the Sadducees are Roman puppets in a way.
Well, I don't think it was anti like any specific group. Like he made anti-Pharisee statements.
But why would he make anti-Pharisee statements when that's the people he says? Doesn't he say to the Pharisees, "We are equal. You should equal the Pharisees in righteousness"?
Doesn't he say to the Pharisees, "You should equal the Pharisees in righteousness"? Wait, what do you mean?
No, I'm not sure. But doesn't he talk about the righteousness of the Pharisees? In terms of them practicing the law.
The whole thing is that the Pharisees have taken the law, the Mosaic law, and they have basically gone out of their covenant by applying additional laws. Yeah. They have effectively hyper-religionized themselves. Yeah. So basically, there's a lot of stories you can go into this.
Sure.
Jesus is basically saying, look at what they do. Yeah. What they're doing is just for show. They want to be perceived as righteous. Yeah. They're not about actually being righteous. They want to be perceived as such. And he gives an example of a woman who gives a very small amount of money in donation into charity, right? In the temple. And they scoff and they're like, we give so much more than she does. Yeah. And his point is that she gave everything she could, whereas they only gave a fraction of what they could have. Yeah. And there's others as well. But to say that he's like anti-Roman or anti...
Well, I'm saying, okay, I know I'm going on. So I'm saying like this clearly, for me, there's a massive ignoring of the fact that there's two factions at play in Jerusalem at the time. I'm separating them. So there's the Sadducees and the Herodian Jews, which are allied with the Roman Empire. And then you had the Pharisees, the Zealots, and the Sicarii, who are very anti-Roman occupation. The Roman Empire goes to war with the second faction, and Jesus' messaging, it seems to be, if you look at it historically, it seems to be towards this second faction. But he's being shifted away from the second faction in the Gospels, and he's being shown as being in opposition to the second faction at the time the war is happening. The Pharisees, the Zealots, and the Sicarii. Right. So he's basically like in the Gospels and in the Christian tradition that comes about later, it's showing him as being like against these strict Torah Orthodox Jews. Whereas he is a Torah Orthodox Jew, he seems to be saved a lot of times by the Pharisees throughout the Gospels. He has followers amongst the Pharisees. Why is he so anti-Pharisee and why is he so anti-Torah Orthodoxy, according to the Gospels and according to the Christian tradition?
I don't think he is in the sense of...
The reason I'm saying he is because the Roman occupation, a few years later, after he disappears, completely obliterates Jerusalem. Because of to them, these people are extremists. And they take this figurehead of Jesus, they pacify him, and then they bring him back to the pantheon in a way, like, that's what I'm trying to say. That's what's
the
happening.
problem with that is that there's a much simpler explanation, which is just that he did have issues with the Pharisees, and that did occupy a large amount of his time.
Yeah.
The Pharisees were a dominant group at his time, and therefore it was appropriate for him to do so. I mean, it's difficult because there's even stories where he helps the Romans, like he heals a centurion's son, for example. The Samaritans, he spends time with a Samaritan woman. Again, it doesn't seem like he's against anyone as such. He's against behaviours.
And also, you touched on Jesus Barabbas, right, a bit earlier. So
Yes.
it's very interesting to me that there is in the Gospels themselves, there is a Jesus, Son of the Father, who has a massive following amongst the Jewish.
I'm going to have to leave in
Yeah, sure.
a few minutes, but,
Sure, but it's interesting to me that in the Gospels themselves, there's a figure called Jesus, Son of the Father, who has a massive following amongst the lay Jewish crowd in Jerusalem, and he is released and saved from crucifixion, right? And he's a very anti-Roman, anti-establishment figure, Jesus, Son of the Father.
Yes. So some theorise that he may have been the leader of a rebellion.
Sure.
And that Barabbas may be a nickname, basically.
Okay, so why is his nickname Son of the Father, and why is he released opposed to Jesus Christ?
It may have been because who was the head of the rebel before? In other words, it's a sort of play on words with the fact that he's his son. But that's literally it. It's possible it was a name, because the issue is that Abba, father, is a very common name.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a merge of two things. It is very unusual, though.
It's very unusual. Why would you be called? Yeah, sure. There's like son of David or son of
exactly.
Goliath. Why would you be called son of the Father?
So this is why there's a scholarly view that it's a nickname. It's like something that people knew him by because of something he had done.
Okay.
It's
Very unusual, and it's also interesting the way that he's chosen to be released, although he's depicted as being some kind of psychopathic sicarii, right? Who goes and stabs anyone.
I don't remember reading that in the Gospels.
Yeah, sure. No, but I mean, like, that might come from the tradition, but
Maybe.
like he's seen as he's seen as a bandit and as a danger to the average Jew, right?
I could be wrong. Maybe the Gospels themselves say he was part of it, or maybe that's the theory.
Yeah.
I think it does say something about what he did, but I can't remember what. So
Okay, but it's just interesting that they're releasing someone who's a danger to the state, and they're crucifying someone who's not supposedly as big a danger to the state.
Well, it would make sense in the context of if this guy was like doing stuff against the Romans, then the Jews probably wouldn't have any issue with him, but they would have an issue with Christ because he's proclaiming to be the Messiah, and he is claiming also to be God.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, that's recorded in the Gospels, right? He was claiming to be God, according to the Jews.
So I know you have to go. I just got one last question about. Are you familiar with like the earliest church fathers? So who is the earliest church father?
I'm learning at the moment. I'm studying patristics in my own time.
So who is like the earliest church father you have?
Oh, well...
I mean, I know it's a debatable like terminology, church father, but I mean, like, could you say Clement of Rome?
That we have, like, yeah, that's one of them. There are three: Ignatius, Polycarp, and Clement of Rome.
Clement of Rome, okay.
Three main sort of like.
So Clement of Rome, he, like, from what I've read, he's associated with a figure Titus Flavius Clemens up to the 19th century. The figure Titus Flavius Clemens as being like that historical figure.
Up to the
19th century.
19th century.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, like the pre-Clementine writings, I believe, they talk about this figure, Clement of Rome, as being this figure. And this figure, Titus Flavius Clemens, either it being him or being basically a servant of Titus Flavius Clemens. This figure, Titus Flavius Clemens, he is meant to be the husband of Domitilla. So he's meant to be the great nephew of the Emperor Vespasian, and he's meant to have married his cousin Domitilla. So, is it a problem for you if your earliest church father is a member of the Roman Emperor's household, and he's married another member of the Roman Emperor's household, and his two children are meant to be the Roman Empress after him?
I don't think so. No.
That's not an issue.
Or
I'm not saying it is him, but I'm saying it's associated as being him, and it's also associated as Clement of Rome being a servant of...
Again, only because I'm looking at this now.
Yeah.
There's something called the Marcionite Chronicle that mentions Muawiyah praying at the site of Golgotha, which is the place where Jesus was crucified.
Okay.
That's not what a Muslim does.
Yeah.
But, you know, like... just weird. It's just very weird. And we don't know how to explain that as historians.
Sure. But they're contested reports. They're contested reports.
See, this is proof that Muawiyah was a diehard Christian.
Yeah.
And I would be pushing that, do you understand?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you just have to say, look, I do think that this does tell things about his earlier stuff.
No, but I'm not using the historical. I understand what you're saying. You're coming from the historical approach, and you're saying like it's double standards. But I'm saying your church tradition, so the Catholic tradition and the Orthodox tradition, recognize Domitilla as being a Christian, and they recognize Domitilla as being a niece of the emperor.
Okay, so they're Christians. Why is that problematic?
That's problematic because, like, Domitilla's two children are promised to become Roman emperors. According to the Emperor Domitian, like he wants Domitilla's two emperors.
So there could have been a point where there could have been a Christian emperor much sooner than
and then we're taught this thing about like martyrdom tradition and Christians are persecuted throughout. Like
you asked me at the beginning, I was like, it's kind of a misconception. Persecution came in waves.
Sure.
And it was like localized.
Sure.
Like active persecution, actively going around getting people. You can say there's like a passive persecution in the sense that, you know, it's not a dominant religion. It's seen as a weird sect of Judaism.
But it's just I'm sorry, just to finish up. So like, there's Christian, there's members of the imperial household who are Christian, right? And very influential members of the imperial household are Christian. They are using the same symbol as Apollo, and the Roman emperor at the time, he's also using Apollo's imagery. So there's like a link to paganism in early Christianity, right?
Well, I mean, technically, like, pagans have always grabbed whatever they could. That's kind of their thing, right? So it shouldn't surprise us if you find people in history who, like, were pagan and wanted to just borrow Christian symbols. Or...
No, I'm saying the other way around. I'm saying Christians are borrowing Roman pagan symbols.
I mean, in some situations, I think that can happen. Like,
I agree. You can borrow pagan symbols, but at the same time, using it in the same time, in the same context for your same god, that's issue for me, right?
Why? I mean,
like these guys are saying.
What do they think it meant? Like, what were they symbolizing?
It symbolized Apollo.
Yeah. So again, they're pagans, aren't they?
And it's just, to me, what it seems like is they're taking this figure of Jesus, they're bringing him into the pantheon in a way. They're making him a more Catholic version of the god Apollo, a more Catholic being more universal version of the god Apollo. So, like this figure, we can turn him into a more universal version of the god Apollo. We can turn him into a fusion god figure, like we turned Serapis into a fusion when we invaded Egypt, and we kind of took the Egyptian, when the Greeks invaded Egypt and they took the figure.
An explanation of this could
Osiris.
just be that there were Christians, pagans, who worshipped Apollo, who became Christians and then went, wow, I've seen lots of like similarities.
Sure.
So I'm going to contrast them and make symbols because I think,
okay.
I mean, people do that.
No, but it's interesting that so there's that like kind of paganism element there, right?
Well, in the sense that if you were formerly pagan and you were transitioning to be a Christian and you notice similarities, you could be like, people do things like that.
Okay.
I mean, you know, it's a human thing to do. To suggest that this is somehow like revealing some secret revisionist history of Christianity, I think that's...
No, I'm not saying it's like a secret. I'm saying like it's just something that's not talked about enough, I feel. Like the fact that like the early church saints, they are members of the Roman emperor's family. Stuff like this.
Okay, I'm going to have to go, but just before I go, if we were to look at this consistently, the Islamic, I mean, you know, like the Umayyad caliphates had like, in their own royal courts, like pictures of naked women and wine.
Sure.
Like,
if they did, but they're not. But they're not the Rashid. They're not like from the fourth rightly Ghalib caliphs.
They're not. No, they're not. They're from the Umayyad period. But my point, and it's a lot further north. But
and popes made mistakes, right? Popes made mistakes.
I would say that's the same. So, to me, that's not. I mean, it's an interesting part of history, right?
Yeah.
But I have to be realistic in what I derive from that. And part of what I'm interested in is what can I derive, what can't I derive. So I would suggest when you read this book, no worries, but contrast it with modern scholarship. What a modern scholar like. Be mainstream as much as you can, and to give good reasons for what you think, and not just try to like. Yeah,
I understand, and also I just find it's just very unusual that like. Sometimes the only sources we can find about the early first century Palestine is based off Josephus, and Josephus himself is a traitor to the Jewish people because he defected from the Jewish revolt to the Roman emperor's side, and that's why he's called Flavius Josephus. He got given that title because he associated himself with the Flavian dynasty, right? So like this is clearly a very biased source, right? Because he's defecting to their side. He's making up all these stories about he's the only guy who survived. All of his companions stabbed each other, and he's the only guy who came out the well.
It's never as clear cut as things, right?
Yeah.
There is a case in Josephus for Christians later changing part of it. There's a very specific verse where he says something like, it's something about Jesus being God, and it looks as if someone must have edited that in, because it would be very odd for Josephus to say that, given that he wasn't friendly to Christians. But historians generally agree with everything else. It's just that one verse that they're suspicious about, where they'll be like, Josephus did know about Christians, and he did write about Christians. So yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for the conversation.
No worries. Thanks for the earlier discussion about Islam as well. That was quite nice.
No worries. I hope we have.
Yeah, sure. And hopefully next time we can talk about something more unifying as well. I think last time we talked about Zechariah 11:17, and it's talking about like a figure of the Antichrist. In I don't know if you remember.
I don't.
But yeah, it was just interesting. Like the figure of the Antichrist in Zechariah 11:17, it talks about him having one arm and having one eye. Okay. And the parallels of that with the Islamic version of the Antichrist.
I was gonna say, that reminds me of the Dajjal.
Exactly, and the fact that it's like trying to unify on those kind of parameters that we have the same enemy, we're not each other's enemy. Also, when you look at the writings of the Second Vatican Council and the way that they talk very positively about Islam, about
When you say the Second Vatican Council, you mean Vatican II?
Vatican II, Vatican II, and the way it says that interfaith, like there's been a lot of issues between Muslims and Christians throughout history, but we have to ignore that and we have to move towards an area of peace and understanding and civil discussion, which I feel is quite lacking in the park, but every discussion I've had with you...
I'm part of the ecumenical tradition, so for me...
So you hold yourself accountable to Vatican II?
I try to bridge differences in doctrine between the Catholics, the Protestants and the Orthodox.
But do you hold yourself to Vatican II?
No, because I'm not actually a Catholic, right? I'm a Roman Catholic, so I don't hold myself to that.
Okay.
But I would try to encourage unity among
but like the Vatican is trying to encourage unity amongst Muslims and Christians. It says that they worship the same God. It says that we worship the same God, right? According to Vatican II. It implies that heavily.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah. But then how can you be ecumenical with Catholics and Protestants and not be ecumenical with Muslims?
Because I think that Catholics, Protestants and Orthodox worship the same God. Muslims, I think it's a different.
The Vatican says that they worship... The Vatican is the authority of the Roman... The Vatican is the authority of Roman Catholicism, right?
Yes, it is.
And it says they worship the same God as Muslims.
Yep.
So how can you be ecumenical with Catholics and not be ecumenical with Muslims?
Because I can call for unity but still have disagreements in theology. Like ecumenical doesn't mean we just sort of like all merge. What ecumenical really means is like as part of the body of Christ, I want to focus on primary doctrines. I want to affirm that Christ is the Son of God incarnate, that he was born of a virgin, that he lived a sinless life, that he died on the cross, that he rose again 3 days later, and then he ascended to the Father.
Do you see Muslims worship the same God in some way, shape, or form?
There are too many differences. I think Allah is in a sense a different God.
But then aren't you making takfir in a way on the Vatican?
I disagree with them. Yeah.
So you disagree with the Vatican?
Oh, of course, yeah. I disagree.
But then you're disagreeing. Like Catholicism is the Vatican, right? Sorry, this is very important.
Roman Catholicism.
Yeah, Roman Catholicism is the Vatican.
Catholicism just means universal.
Sure. Yeah, like we talked about earlier, right?
Sure,
But Roman Catholicism is the Vatican, right?
Yeah.
The Vatican, which is Roman Catholicism, is saying that they worship the same God as the Muslims, right? And we need to talk with Muslims in a peaceful manner on positive things, and we shouldn't go back to like historical issues, right? So like if you disagree with the Vatican that Muslims worship the same God as Roman Catholics, then you're not worshiping the same God as the Roman Catholics.
Well, no, I just disagree with what the council said.
But the council, like papal infallibility, right? Like I thought, like you can't go against the council and be a Roman Catholic. So like if you believe that Protestants and Catholics and Orthodox worship the same God, you can't believe that if you believe you worship the same God as the Catholics, you have to believe you worship the same God as the Muslims.
I just have to think that the Roman Catholic position is wrong. That's fine.
So they're wrong. But then you don't worship the same God as the Catholics. It's a clear logical...
No, I think that we do. I just think they're wrong when they think that the Muslim God is the same God.
But the Pope is saying that, right?
Yeah, I think it's wrong.
So the Pope's wrong, right?
Yes.
So the Pope... Okay, if I say I worship... Okay, I'm not even going to go there because that's like... But if the Pope says he worships the same God as Muslims, and you say you don't worship the same God as Muslims, you and the Pope are not worshipping the same God.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, so you can't be ecumenical with Catholics if you're going to be so anti-Muslim.
Ecumenical doesn't mean complete agreement on that.
Yeah, but this is about like the main thing, Tawheed. Like this is the fundamental thing, right? Like you're saying. I mean,
Well, actually,
you see the logical.
The reason why I say that's wrong is because I think the Pope is mistaken when he thinks it's the same thing. He is actually worshipping the same God as like the Protestants and the Orthodox are. It's just that he's confused about what the Muslim God is. He thinks it's the same as. That's how I would resolve that.
Okay.
Anyway,
okay, interesting way of resolving it. All right, no worries, sorry.
Do you want to do a wrap up?
No, yeah, sure. So we talked about me and Chris, right? Chris. Yeah, we talked about early Christianity, the link between early Christianity and pagan Rome at the time, the historical context in which early Christianity arose. We talked about some of the early Roman emperors, Vespasian, Titus, Domitian, a bit of Nero as well, and yeah, it was an interesting discussion. We talked about the way we should apply historical methods to scripture, and yeah, we just towards the end there we talked about ecumenicalism and how like I want to build bridges with Christians, but Christians in the park seem to not want to build bridges with Muslims, even though Vatican II says that we should push towards working together, we should push towards having civil discussions with each other, as we did today, which I agree. And as Vatican II says that Christians, Catholics, Roman Catholics worship the same God as the Muslims. So you can't take the position that Protestants and Catholics worship the same gods, but Muslims don't, worship the same God, but Muslims don't, because that's just logic. So yeah, take care. Yeah, sure, go ahead. All right, thank you. Take care.